This is the story of a boy who had nothing, no riches, no fine clothes, no future promised, yet carried a gift the world could not explain. Ikem's life began in hardship beneath the quiet skies of Owo-Asaa, where hunger walked beside him and his widowed mother struggled to keep hope alive. But in his hands rested an old wooden flute, a humble inheritance with a destiny far greater than anyone imagined. In this folktale, you will witness how purity can heal what medicine cannot, how greed can awaken forces darker than night, and how a single stolen melody can reshape the fate of an entire household. Watch closely, for in Ikem's story, every note of the flute carries both a blessing and a warning. Welcome to Afrotales by Zizandra, home of storytelling. The village of Owo-Asaa was the kind of place where time moved slowly and the earth breathed in rhythm with the people. Every footstep stirred red dust, every breeze carried the scent of firewood and distant rain, and every morning began with the low cry of the rooster that warned the sun to rise. In this quiet world lived a boy named Ikem, gentle and soft-hearted, whose life had been shaped more by struggle than by fortune. His trousers were always too short, his shirts always faded, and his slippers had been stitched and re-stitched so many times that even the rubber was tired of holding on. But despite the hardship, the boy carried something no one could take away, the old wooden flute his late father left behind. It was carved from the heart of an iroko tree, dark and smooth from years of use, and its tone carried a purity that felt almost spiritual. Every morning before the sun fully opened its eyes, Ikem walked to the ancient iroko tree at the edge of the village, a towering giant that had witnessed births, deaths, festivals, and centuries of changing seasons. He would sit cross-legged at its base, lift the flute gently and play. His melodies floated across the village like soft wind passing over calm water. To some, it was just music. To others, it was comfort. But to Ikem, it was the only inheritance his father left, the one thing that made his suffering bearable. The villagers often paused in their morning routines to listen, even if just for a few seconds, because his music had a way of touching the part of the heart that words could not reach. His widowed mother, thin from struggle and weary from life's battles, always stood by the doorway of their tiny mud house, listening with closed eyes because the music helped her gather strength for the day ahead. She loved her son deeply, not because he brought her anything material, for he had nothing, but because his heart shone brighter than gold. Sometimes when hunger gnawed at them mercilessly, she feared that the world would swallow the boy's innocence. But each time he played, her fears melted like hot wax dripping in the sun. Life, however, did not spare them from hardship. Their crops rarely yielded enough. Their roof leaked whenever rain grew angry, and many nights they went to sleep with empty stomachs and hearts full of prayers. Still, Ikem never complained. He wiped his mother's tears, fetched water from the far stream, chopped firewood, and played the flute for her when grief became heavy enough to crush her bones. The flute was more than an instrument. It was a companion, a healer, a reminder that even in poverty there could be beauty. Sometimes he wondered why the world was so unfair, why some people were born into comfort while others crawled through life's bitterness. But then he remembered his father's last words, spoken with shaking breath the night before he passed away. "My son, this flute, it carries blessing. It brings peace wherever there is pain. Use it well. Use it with a clean heart." Those words shaped every note Ikem ever played. The villagers didn't know the story behind the flute, but they all agreed the boy's music was not ordinary. Chickens stopped scratching the ground when he played, children paused mid-run, and even the wind gentled itself to listen. Elders often muttered that the boy's music carried the footprints of spirits, but no one could truly explain what they felt. Yet even with such a gift, Ikem remained unnoticed by the larger world. The village was too small, too forgotten, too swallowed by poverty for miracles to grow tall. His universe was limited to bare feet on sun-baked soil, a mother's tired smile, and an old flute echoing beneath ancient branches. Far away in the bustling heart of the city, under bright lights and tall buildings, lived a woman named Madame Chioma, known across states for her wealth, beauty, and influence. Her life was wrapped in luxury: marble floors, expensive perfumes, shimmering gowns, and cars that announced power with every engine growl. But beneath the glamour hid a truth she never revealed. She was suffering from a mysterious illness that tormented her every night. Her bones burned as if set on fire, her head pounded like a drum in the hands of angry spirits, and her chest tightened so violently she often woke gasping for breath. The finest doctors examined her, specialists probed and tested, traditional healers chanted and burned incense, yet no one found an answer. She was a woman with everything except peace. Each day she smiled for the world, but each night she cried herself to sleep. Her husband grew cold and impatient with her condition, not because he cared, but because her weakness made it difficult for him to parade her as the jewel of his status. As her pain worsened, her heart dimmed, and the once powerful woman began to live like a shadow in her own mansion. Until one afternoon, her philanthropic foundation organized a charity outreach in Owo-Asaa village. an event she attended only out of duty, even though she could barely stand without support. She arrived with a convoy of luxury vehicles that rolled into the village like thunder. Every villager gathered to watch. It was rare to see such extravagance within their dusty boundaries. And then, as Madame Chioma stepped out of her vehicle and walked past the old Aroko tree, a sound touched her ears, soft, clean, almost divine. A melody so pure, her breath caught. A strange warmth spread from her chest to her limbs, and the pain that had lived in her bones for months began to fade, slowly, gently, like a dying flame. She froze. Her guards turned, confused, but she lifted a trembling hand to silence them. She followed the sound like someone enchanted, every step pulling her deeper into an unexpected peace. When she reached the tree, she saw him, a barefoot village boy in torn clothes, eyes closed, playing an old wooden flute as though the world depended on every note. Something inside her cracked open, tears gathered in her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt calm, truly calm. The wind seemed to pause. The villagers watched silently from a distance, and the boy continued playing, unaware that destiny had wrapped its fingers around his life and was beginning to pull. When he finally lowered the flute and opened his eyes, their gazes met. He quickly stood, shy and startled, but she smiled through her tears. She felt no pain. None. It was as though the illness had been washed from her body by the music. She didn't speak for a long time. She simply breathed, something she hadn't done without discomfort in months. That moment became the beginning of a connection neither of them understood yet. But it was also the moment someone else noticed her joy with suspicion, someone whose heart was darker than she knew. Chioma returned to the city the evening after the charity event, but her mind did not follow her home. Her body sat in the back seat of her tinted SUV, leaning against the cool leather, but her spirit was still beneath the ancient Aroko tree in Owo-Asaa, listening to that soft, miraculous melody that had washed away her pain. The moment she got home, her husband noticed the brightness in her eyes, a brightness he hadn't seen in months. But instead of joy, suspicion filled his heart. "You seem different," he muttered, scanning her face as if searching for a secret. Chioma simply smiled and shook her head, refusing to explain until she understood it herself. She went to bed early that night, expecting the usual torment of pain that always woke her after midnight. But for the first time in months, she slept peacefully from dusk till dawn. No burning bones, no crushing headache, no suffocating chest. She woke up with tears in her eyes because she couldn't believe what her body was telling her. The suffering was gone. Something had shifted within her. Something she couldn't explain but desperately needed to experience again. As she sat in the quiet of her luxurious bedroom, the sound of Ikem's flute replayed in her memory like a whisper of hope refusing to fade. The next morning, without informing her husband or her staff, she ordered her driver to prepare the car. "Where to, Ma?" he asked. "Owo-Asaa," she said calmly. He blinked. "Again, Ma?" She nodded. He didn't ask further. Chioma's tone told him she would not entertain questions. When they arrived, she dismissed everyone and walked alone toward the Aroko tree. And there he was, Ikem, sitting cross-legged in his usual spot, wiping dust from the old wooden flute. His clothes were even more worn than she remembered, and his slippers looked tired enough to give up, but his eyes had the softness of morning dew. When he saw her, he jumped to his feet, unsure whether to bow, greet, or run away. "Good morning, Ma," he whispered, his voice small but steady. Chioma smiled. "Play for me," she said gently. She didn't need to explain. He simply raised the flute, took a deep breath, and began. The music wrapped around her like warm water, soothing every corner of her soul. By the time he finished, her heartbeat was steady, her mind calm, and her body light. She opened her purse and offered him money, not out of pity, but out of overwhelming gratitude. But Ikem shook his head firmly. "My father said this flute is not for selling healing," he said quietly. "It is for easing burdens." Chioma froze. There was something sacred about the way he spoke, something ancient, something pure. She sat beside him, asking questions about his life, his mother, and the meaning behind the flute. Every answer humbled her. This boy had nothing, no wealth, no comfort, no security, yet he carried a peace that even the richest people in her world couldn't buy. Days turned into weeks, and Chioma began visiting Owo-Asaa in secret. She grew close to Ikem and his mother in a way she had never experienced with anyone outside her wealthy circle. She laughed with them, shared food with them, listened to their stories, and shed tears for their hardship. With every visit, her strength returned until her illness became nothing more than a fading memory. She found herself waking early, excited to see the boy with the magical flute. Sometimes, Ikem played soft melodies. Other times, he played songs so powerful she felt her spirit lift like a bird released from a cage. She offered to sponsor his schooling, to move them into a better home, but Ikem's mother insisted on praying over any gift before accepting. Chioma admired that. She admired their humility, their sincerity, and the simplicity with which they lived. In their company, she felt more peace than she felt in her millionaire mansion, but her constant visits did not go unnoticed. Her husband, Damien, began asking questions. Where are you always going? What is in that village that keeps calling your name? Why won't you tell me? At first, she brushed him off, confident he would lose interest. But Damien was not the kind of man who let things go. His pride could not stand the idea that something or someone could give his wife the happiness he no longer provided. He began digging. One afternoon, Damien followed her convoy in a separate car, ensuring she did not know he was trailing behind. When he arrived in Owo-Asaa, he stayed hidden behind a cluster of palm trees, watching her sit under the Iroko tree with Ikem. The moment the boy raised his flute and music floated through the air, Damien saw the transformation on his wife's face, the peace, the glow, the healing. His shock tightened into envy. Envy hardened into anger, and anger twisted into greed. So this is it, he muttered. This boy. He watched her cry softly as Ikem played. Watched the peace wash over her like a blessing the world could not explain. That flute, he whispered, it must be worth more than I can imagine. In his eyes, it was not a sacred inheritance, it was a tool. A tool that could bring him power, fame, wealth, and control beyond anything he already possessed. While Chioma's heart filled with gratitude, his filled with a dark, consuming obsession. And as he watched Ikem blow into the flute with pure intention, Damien made a silent vow. He would take it, one way or another. Damien could no longer ignore the transformation he had witnessed in Chioma. Each day she returned from Owo-Asaa radiant, lighter, almost unrecognizable from the woman he had watched wither before his eyes for months. Her laughter, once rare and shallow, now rang through their mansion like a melody of spring after endless winter. Her eyes shone with a quiet, unshakable joy that should have belonged to him as her husband, yet it did not. It belonged to the boy, Ikem, and that cursed old flute that seemed to command her heart and body with invisible strings. Night after night, Damien's sleep was tormented by images of the boy seated beneath the ancient Iroko tree, flute in hand, playing as if he were speaking directly to Chioma's soul. The more Damien pondered, the more his obsession grew, twisting slowly into a gnawing, insatiable hunger. If that boy has the power to heal, to enchant her, to bring peace, why should he keep it for himself? Damien muttered one evening, pacing his vast mansion hallway, shadows from the candlelight dancing against the marble walls. I could be the one to wield such power. I could be the one to command respect, awe, even fear. And wealth. He paused, biting the inside of his cheek. Wealth beyond imagining. His heart thundered with ambition, and the seed of greed took root, thriving in the darkness of his obsession. He began to plan, obsessively silently, a plan that would take the flute from Ikem's hands, seize its power for himself, and leave nothing of the boy's gift intact. He could not see the boy as human. In Damien's mind, Ikem had become an obstacle, an object, a key to wealth and status. Damien's mind became a prison of strategy, replaying every possible way he could reach Owo-Asaa, bypass Chioma's guidance, and claim the flute, all while keeping his intentions hidden. Every day he counted down, watching for the perfect moment to strike, unaware that the universe itself had begun to weave consequences around his plan. Consequences that would eventually make every greedy thought a curse upon his own flesh. The night of the theft arrived like a shadow with sharp claws. Damien slipped from the city to the village under the cover of darkness, carrying not only a lantern, but a heart full of desperation, pride, and poisoned ambition. Owo-Asaa was quiet, bathed in silver moonlight, its dirt paths glimmering faintly like starlit trails. The ancient Iroko tree towered above him, black and ominous against the sky, its branches twisting as though aware of the intrusion. From beneath its leaves, faint music floated, teasing his ears, reminding him why he had come, the flute. There was Ikem, as always, sitting cross-legged, the flute resting against his lips. Damien's chest tightened, not from fear, but from anticipation, as if every beat of his heart synchronized with the soft rhythm of the melody. He crept forward, silent as a snake, avoiding even the smallest pebble that might betray his presence. The boy's mother slept in the small hut nearby, oblivious to the predator moving within their midst. For a fleeting moment, Damien paused, and a thought brushed against his mind, almost like a whisper of conscience. What am I doing? This is a child, a boy with nothing. Why am I here? But ambition roared louder than conscience. He lunged forward in the dark, snatched the flute from Ikem's hands before the boy could fully react, and turned, running toward his waiting car with the prize he believed would rewrite his life. The sound of the flute's wood brushing against his palms was intoxicating, almost humming with power. But unknown to him, this act of theft had awakened something ancient. The flute, carved from the sacred heart of the Iroko tree and blessed by generations of Ikem's ancestors, vibrated subtly in Damien's grip. A low, imperceptible pulse ran through the wood, almost like a heartbeat, as if the instrument itself knew the darkness now tied to it. Damien did not notice. He only felt triumph, excitement, and the thrill of stolen opportunity. Behind him, Ikem, clutching empty hands, and a cry of anguish tore from his chest, not of anger, but of heartbreak. The village, the tree, and the night itself seemed to sigh, as if mourning a violation that should never have occurred. The days that followed Damien's theft were filled with immediate visible change, but not the kind he had anticipated. In the city, he presented himself as a miracle worker, promising relief to those who suffered, insisting that his service came with a price high enough to make kings hesitate and merchants tremble. The first few encounters seemed to work. Patients left with pale smiles, hands pressed to their chests as if some invisible hand had eased their suffering. Damien's ego soared. He allowed himself to bask in the admiration of the wealthy, the gratefulness of the afflicted, and the flow of gold that entered his pockets with each performance. Yet soon, a creeping, unfamiliar discomfort began to gnaw at him. His muscles ached in ways unfamiliar, his head throbbed with persistent pulses, and a burning sensation crept through his chest with every note he played. Damien dismissed it at first, attributing it to fatigue, stress, or the heat of the city. But the symptoms worsened. A rich merchant he attempted to heal had left the room smiling, but within hours, the merchant's sickness dissipated only to return to Damien's own body with unrelenting intensity. Damien felt panic rise. His wealth, status, and power could buy almost anything. Yet the one thing he coveted most, the flute, now became an instrument of his suffering. He tried to hide it, telling no one of the pain, hoping the sensation would fade. But each time he played for a patient, each time he extended the stolen gift as a means to profit, the sickness multiplied, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always insistent, always exacting a price. He began to realize in stark terror that the very instrument he thought would crown him king was now a dagger embedded in his own flesh. Damien's nights grew sleepless, his days became torture, and slowly, whispers of his strange ailments began circulating among his circle, sowing fear and suspicion. Back in Owo-Asaa, Ikem and his mother wept quietly, feeling the absence of the flute like a wound in their souls. The boy's eyes, once filled with innocence and light, were shadowed with grief. His melodies had been the village's heartbeat. Now the air hung heavy, empty, and quiet. Chioma, too, felt the void, sensing the theft like a personal violation. She returned to the village repeatedly, searching, pleading with her intuition to guide her to the missing instrument. Yet through despair, a quiet resolve formed within her. She would not allow this act of greed to persist. She would find the boy's flute, return the flute to its rightful hands, and restore balance. The universe, it seemed, had already begun weaving consequences, invisible threads of justice, subtle warnings whispered to Damien that he could not yet hear. The theft had set in motion a reckoning, and though Damien remained blind to it, the moment was approaching when he would face the full weight of his ambition, and the purity of Ikem's heart would rise like a tide against his dark, selfish schemes. The boy, the mother, and the sacred flute had been wronged, but their story was far from over, and the world itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, waiting for the scales of justice to tilt. The first true sign came on a humid Tuesday evening as the sun dipped behind the city skyscrapers and cast long, golden shadows across Damien's luxurious sitting room. He sat alone, gripping the flute tightly, staring at its smooth polished wood as though demanding it reveal a secret he had missed. Sweat trickled down his forehead. His chest rose and fell rapidly. For days he had tried to ignore the way his body shuddered after every performance, how his throat burned, how his lungs felt bruised, how his heart thumped as though struggling to escape his chest. But tonight, the pain became unmistakable. It started with a piercing stab beneath his ribs, sharp enough to force him to his knees. His vision blurred. His fingers twitched uncontrollably. And as he gasped, the flute slipped from his hand and clattered onto the marble floor. Yet instead of a harmless clink, it emitted a low, haunting hum that vibrated through the entire mansion. Damien froze, his breath catching in terror. The hum grew louder, resonating like the distant wail of a creature mourning its stolen freedom. The chandelier above him flickered, casting frantic shadows across the walls, and for a heartbeat, Damien saw something. No, someone, standing by his doorway. A small silhouette. A boy's silhouette. Ikem. The image lasted only a second before vanishing, but it was enough to send Damien stumbling backward until his spine hit the wall. His hands trembled violently as he grabbed the flute again, his heart pounding as though trying to punch through his chest. No, no, he whispered, shaking his head so hard his vision pulsed. I'm imagining things. It's stress, fatigue, nothing more. But deep down, some ancient instinct, older than logic, older than denial, knew this was not fatigue. It was not imagination. It was consequence. It was punishment. And the more he clutched the flute, the heavier it felt, as if every selfish act he had committed since stealing it had soaked into the wood like poison, growing, waiting. Chioma, on the other hand, could no longer sit still. The heaviness in her spirit had grown unbearable. Every night she lay awake replaying the last morning she saw Ikem, his smile, his gratitude, his quiet, angelic humility. And now he was missing, stripped of his life's gift, his soul's only inheritance. The thought tormented her. She drove to Owo-Asaa repeatedly, ignoring the housework, ignoring the business appointments that once defined her days. Her heart drifted constantly toward the village, tethered to the boy whose music had soothed the part of her that no doctor, no medication, no therapy had been able to reach. When she arrived that evening, the air was heavy, too quiet, too tense. Ikem's mother sat outside her hut, eyes swollen from crying. Her wrapper was tied hastily, her hair uncombed. Her hands trembled as she traced circles in the dust with a stick. "Mama Ikem," Chioma whispered as she approached, kneeling beside the woman. "Any news?" The woman shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "My child has been crying since the flute was taken, as if part of his soul was cut away. He cannot eat. He cannot sleep. He barely speaks. He only sits by the Iroko tree and weeps." Chioma's heart clenched. She rose quickly and marched to the tree, the old wood towering like a guardian watching the world through ancient, unreadable eyes. And there he was, Ikem, sitting on the dusty ground with his arms wrapped around his knees, his eyes hollow, his face streaked with silent tears. The sight shattered her. She knelt in front of him. "My child, talk to me." "What happened?" Ikem lifted his face slowly. The sadness in his eyes made her chest ache. His voice was hoarse. "A man took it. I don't know why. I don't know what I did." Chioma inhaled sharply, her instincts screaming. She already knew the answer. Her spirit had known for days. Damien, her husband, the one person who had watched her healing with eyes darkened by jealousy instead of relief. Rage burned in her belly, hot and acidic. But beneath the rage lay something else, fear. Because if Damien had truly stolen the flute, then the consequences would not stop at sickness or discomfort. The flute was not an ordinary instrument. It was a living heirloom carved from sacred wood. It was pure, innocent, and ancient. And when harmed, when stolen, when exploited, the spirit tied to it would rise not gently, not mercifully, but with a justice only the supernatural could deliver. Chioma swallowed, stood up slowly, and said, "Ikem, I will bring your flute back. I don't care what it costs me. I don't care what stands in my way." The boy's eyes glistened with something that resembled hope. She touched his cheek softly, then turned around, determination hardening her spine. She did not wait for dawn. She did not wait for calm or logic. She sped into the night with fury in her heart and a vow on her lips. Back in the city, Damien staggered into their bedroom, drenched in sweat, his breaths coming in broken gasps. Every inch of his skin tingled, burning like invisible ants crawled beneath the flesh. He gripped the bedpost, his vision dimming, his throat tightening as though an unseen hand squeezed it. What is happening to me?" he croaked, stumbling toward the mirror. What he saw made his stomach drop. His eyes, normally sharp, cold, calculating, now carried faint dark rings around them, pulsing as if bruised from within. Veins snaked across his neck, dark and swollen, tracing the pattern of the flute's carvings. The more he stared, the more the reflection seemed to warp, until suddenly, he blinked and saw not himself, but Ikem's face staring back at him, eyes filled with sorrow, betrayal, and ancient warning. Damien screamed and stumbled backward, crashing into the dresser. Bottles shattered. Perfume splashed across the rug. His chest tightened again. He clawed at his shirt, tearing it open as he gasped for breath. In blind desperation, he raised the flute to his lips, determined to play, believing that perhaps music, any music, might soothe the pain. But the moment he blew the first note, something horrifying happened. A wave of agony ripped through his body, harsher than anything he had ever known. The pain traveled through his ribs like fire, searing his lungs, squeezing his throat, clawing at his scalp. He couldn't stop playing. The flute forced the breath from his lungs as if feeding on him, dragging sound after sound until he collapsed to his knees. The melody that came out was not music. It was a scream disguised as sound, a cry of pain woven into trembling pitch. When he finally broke free and yanked the flute from his lips, he collapsed, chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. This thing is killing me, he rasped. And as if in answer, the chandelier flickered violently. The curtains rustled though there was no wind. The mirror cracked slightly, a thin line creeping across its surface. Damien could feel it. The curse was no longer subtle. It had awakened fully. It was alive, and it was coming for him. He curled into himself on the floor, trembling uncontrollably. Damien felt something stronger than greed, stronger than ambition. He felt fear, deep, primal fear. But before he could gather himself, before he could even attempt to hide the flute, the sound of the front door slamming echoed through the mansion like a thunderclap. Chioma had returned. Chioma marched through the hallway like a storm given human form. Her shoes clicked sharply against the marble, her breath rigid, her eyes blazing with a fury Damien had never witnessed from her. She did not call his name. She did not ask polite questions. She followed her spirit, her intuition, her anger, straight into the bedroom where she found him trembling, drenched in sweat, clutching the flute like a greedy child caught stealing. Damien's heart lurched. He scrambled backward. Chioma, please, listen. She ignored him, stepping closer, her voice trembling with rage and disappointment. You stole from a child. You stole a sacred instrument. You stole the one thing that healed him, the one thing that connected his soul to generations before him. Damien, how low have you fallen? He shook his head violently. You don't understand. You don't know what this thing can do. It heals. It gives power. It is killing you. Chioma snapped, cutting him off. Damien froze, his lips parted. How did she know? She stepped even closer, pointing at his trembling hands, his bruised veins, his exhausted eyes. Look at yourself, she whispered. Look at what greed has turned you into. Tears filled her eyes. Not for Damien, but for Ikem, for the boy whose purity had been violated, whose innocence had been crushed. Give me the flute, she demanded. Now. But Damien clung to it desperately, shaking his head. No, I can't. If I give it back, I lose everything. I lose the contracts, the clients, the reputation. Chioma, don't you see? This flute can make us gods among men. Chioma inhaled sharply, horrified by how far into darkness her husband had fallen. At what cost? She whispered. Damien, you're already paying. He screamed, the sound tearing from his throat like a wounded animal. No, I can still fix this. I can use it. I just need time. His voice broke as another wave of pain slammed through him. His body bowed forward, his hands clawing the air as the flute throbbed, glowing faintly with a sickly warmth. Chioma reached for it, but Damien lashed out instinctively. The movement was wild, terrified, but in his desperation, he shoved her so hard she stumbled and fell against the dresser. The impact rattled the room. For a moment, silence swallowed everything. Damien stared at her in horror. Chioma lifted her head slowly, her eyes filling not with pain, but with realization. So this is who you've become, she whispered. A man who would harm me to protect a curse. Damien collapsed, sobbing. I didn't mean. Chioma, I didn't, but it was too late. She rose to her feet, extending her hand once more, not with anger now, but with solemn, resolute finality. Give me the flute. And something in her voice, something ancient, commanding, righteous, broke through Damien's terror long enough for his trembling fingers to loosen. The flute slipped from his hands into hers. The moment it touched her skin, a strange calm washed through the room. The humming stopped. The shadows stilled. The chandelier steadied. The curse recognized truth, recognized justice. Chioma held the flute close to her chest, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. I'm taking this back to Ikem, she whispered. And whatever happens next, Damien, you brought it upon yourself. She turned away from him and walked out of the room, out of the mansion, out of the life she once knew, holding the flute that would soon bring judgment, healing, and the unraveling of every hidden truth. By the time Chioma's car rolled into Owo-Asaa that evening, the sky had darkened into a heavy purple gloom, as if the heavens themselves sensed the weight of what she carried. Crickets hissed through the night air, palm fronds rustled like whispers, and the village seemed to hold its breath the moment her headlights swept across the dusty road. She stepped out of the car with the flute clutched firmly in both hands, an object so small, yet so powerful that her arms felt heavier than they should. Every step she took toward the ancient Iroko tree felt guided, almost pulled by something invisible. And there he was, Ikem, curled up at the base of the tree, his body frail, his clothes dusty, his once bright eyes dimmed by exhaustion and heartbreak. He didn't even look up when she approached. He only stared at the ground like a child abandoned by destiny. Chioma knelt in front of him, her breath trembling. Ikem, my son, look at me. Slowly, he raised his head, and the moment his eyes fell upon the flute in her hands, a soft gasp escaped his lips. Hope flickered there, a fragile light trembling in the darkness. Mama Chioma, he whispered, stretching a shaking hand toward it as though afraid it might vanish. She placed the flute in his palm with a reverence reserved for sacred relics. The moment skin met wood, the air shifted. A gentle breeze stirred, though the night had been still moments before. The leaves of the Iroko tree shivered, and the earth beneath them vibrated with ancient recognition. Ikem held the flute to his chest, tears slipping silently down his face. Chioma watched as relief washed through him, softening the tension in his small shoulders. But then she noticed something else. His hands were trembling not from weakness, but from the overwhelming energy radiating from the flute itself. It glowed faintly, as though greeting its rightful master. The tree behind them hummed softly, a low note so subtle that only those standing under it could hear. Ikem inhaled deeply, the first steady breath he had taken in days. He lifted the flute slowly, hesitantly, almost fearfully, then pressed it to his lips. Chioma's pulse quickened, the world seemed to still. The first note he played pierced the air like a beam of light. It was pure, sharp, beautiful, and it carried something ancient within it. The sky brightened, the clouds swirled, the air vibrated. The melody poured from him like water from a broken dam, unstoppable, raw, filled with sorrow and relief and destiny all at once. The villagers began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the sound. Mothers paused in their kitchens, fathers stepped away from their outdoor fires, children froze mid-play, they all drifted toward the Iroko tree as though hypnotized. Ikem played. He played with every drop of pain he had carried, every tear, every hunger, every ounce of love he felt for his mother and gratitude for Chioma. And the world listened. Chioma watched with tears streaming down her face. The flute wasn't just healing him, it was healing the land. The dry cracks in the earth softened. The wind cooled. The oppressive heaviness of weeks of pain lifted from the village like smoke rising into the night sky. Ikem's mother knelt to the ground, lifting her hands in thanksgiving. The old chief who rarely walked without support stood straighter, hearing strength flow back into his bones. Something supernatural was unfolding, and every villager knew it. When the final note faded into silence, Ikem lowered the flute slowly. His eyes glowed, not literally, but with a radiance Chioma had only ever seen in people touched by destiny. He turned to her, breathing softly. Mama Chioma, thank you. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. You don't need to thank me, my son. Thank your father who left you this gift. Thank your heart that stayed pure even when the world tried to break you. But their peace was short-lived. Because far away in the city, Damien screamed. Damien's scream echoed through the mansion like a wounded animal, so loud that the security guards outside jolted upright in fear. His body convulsed violently on the bedroom floor, his veins bulging, his breath hitching, his eyes rolling back until only the white showed. The moment Ikem played the flute, the consequences surged into Damien like a violent wave. He clutched his head, feeling fire claw through his skull. He dug his nails into the carpet as a burning pain radiated from his spine, spreading through his limbs. His mouth opened in a silent howl as his lungs seized, no longer pulling air properly. For every note Ikem played, Damien felt as though invisible hands twisted his insides. He coughed, and a splatter of dark mucus stained the floor. No, please. He wailed, dragging himself toward the edge of the bed. His body jerked with each breath. Sweat poured down his face. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled, sending him crashing to his knees. The room spun wildly, walls stretching and collapsing like a nightmare. Shadows darted across the corners. His fingers icy cold while the rest of his body burned. His eyes were sunken and rimmed with dark circles. His lips were cracked and pale. Dark veins snaked across his neck and chest, pulsing like poison. His skin sagged as though drained of vitality. This is not real, he cried. Stop this. I'm sorry. He sobbed, crawling across the room like a dying animal. But the curse was awake. Fully awake. Every greedy act he had committed, every lie, every manipulation, every moment of exploitation surged toward him like a tidal wave of judgment. His vision blurred again, and suddenly the room dissolved. He found himself standing in darkness, deep, endless darkness, with only a glowing silhouette of a boy in the distance. Ikem, why? The silhouette asked softly. Damien swallowed hard. I needed influence. I wanted power. You stole from a child. You stole what was pure. You stole what was meant to heal, and you used it to harm. Damien dropped to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please. Please don't let me die. But the silhouette did not answer. It simply turned and walked away. A sour metallic taste filled his mouth. The whole world dimmed. His breathing slowed, ragged, uneven. Just when it felt like his body would give out completely, the vision snapped away. Damien collapsed onto the bedroom floor, gasping for air. He coughed until his chest hurt. He lay there trembling, drenched in sweat, sobbing. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of true fear, fear of justice, fear of punishment, fear of the consequences greed had carved into his destiny. Too weak to move, he whispered into the floor, "Ikem, please, forgive me." And somewhere in the distance, the final faint note of the flute faded, and silence returned. But for Damien, the nightmare had only just begun. Back in Owo-Asaa, the villagers surrounded Ikem and Chioma with awe and gratitude. Words spread quickly from compound to compound, passing through human mouths and racing across the night like wildfire. People knelt around the Iroko tree, thanking the ancestors for sending the boy who healed with music. The village chief approached Ikem, tears in his eyes. "Your father would be proud," he whispered. Ikem bowed his head, emotion tightening his throat. Chioma stood behind him, her hand gently placed on his shoulder, watching the boy glow with a quiet strength that made her heart swell. For the first time since her illness began, she felt completely, utterly whole. But even as joy washed through the village, a part of her heart remained unsettled. The curse had returned to its rightful owner. Ikem was restored. Owo-Asaa was at peace. But Damien was suffering alone, drowning in horrors she couldn't begin to imagine. She couldn't ignore him forever. He was her husband, even if he had fallen into greed and darkness. "Ikem," she said softly, "I must return to the city at dawn." Ikem looked at her, confusion flickering across his face. "Are you going to him?" "Yes," she whispered. "His actions were evil, but he is still human. And humans sometimes lose their way." Ikem studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Do you think the flute will punish him until he dies?" Chioma's heart twisted. Only destiny knows. But punishment is never the end of the story. Sometimes, it is the beginning of repentance. Ikem lowered his eyes. "Will you come back?" Chioma smiled gently and cupped his cheek. "Always." She stood, smoothing her clothes, and looked toward the dark road leading out of the village. She knew what awaited her in the city: screams, guilt, confusion, perhaps even danger. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would face whatever came next with the truth on her side, with justice guiding her path, and with a sacred flute that no amount of greed could ever corrupt again. As the villagers slowly dispersed and Ikem rested against the tree, the wind shifted softly through the branches. The Iroko murmured like an ancient guardian whispering its approval. For the first time in a long time, hope settled over Owo-Asaa like a warm cloak. But in the city, under cold electric lights and suffocating silence, a broken man lay curled on the floor of a mansion, awaiting the dawn that would decide his fate. Dawn broke over the city in slow, pale streaks of gold, washing the mansion in a weak light that did nothing to soften the heaviness inside. The once mighty home, proud pillars, glossy marble floors, sprawling corridors, now felt like a decaying monument to pride. Chioma pushed open the front door quietly, her heart thudding against her ribs. She half expected to find her husband standing at the top of the stairs with his usual arrogance, demanding an explanation for her leaving the city days earlier. But the silence was suffocating. As she walked deeper into the house, the air grew colder, as though grief itself lived there. A faint sound, like shallow breath and choking sobs, guided her toward the bedroom. Her stomach folded into itself. She hurried forward, pushed the door open, and froze. Damien lay on the floor, curled like a frightened child, his once broad shoulders trembling violently. His eyes, once sharp with selfish ambition, were hollow, swollen, and red. His skin had lost its shine and now carried a grayish tone, and his lips quivered uncontrollably. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Chioma, I didn't think you would come back." She knelt beside him instantly, the sight of his suffering slicing through her like a blade. "Damien," she whispered, "what have you done to yourself?" He looked at her with a brokenness she had never seen before, not on him, not on anyone. As his body convulsed again, he grabbed her hand weakly, clinging to it as if he were drowning. "The curse." Chioma, it came from me, he croaked. I stole from him. I stole something sacred. I lied, extorted, pretended to be a savior while poisoning my soul. Tears pooled in his eyes and spilled freely. And now I'm dying. Chioma squeezed his hand. You're not dying, she said gently, though her voice shook. You're facing the consequences of greed. There is a difference. Damien broke into a sob so raw that it echoed off the marble walls. I was wrong, he gasped. Everything I did was wrong. Chioma, please help me. She closed her eyes, inhaling shakily. I cannot heal you, she whispered. Neither can your money, or your pride, or your position. Only truth can heal you now, only humility. Damien nodded, his chin trembling. Then help me find it, he whispered. The next day, the world shifted in ways no one expected. It began with a quiet knock on the gate of Owo-Asaa. Ikem, sitting beneath the iroko tree with his flute resting across his lap, looked up as Chioma emerged from a dusty taxi alone, her face weary but determined. Ikem, she said softly as she approached him. The boy stood. Is he alive? Chioma replied, but suffering, broken, and begging for mercy. The villagers who had gathered began whispering. Some shook their heads. Some muttered that a man who stole from a child deserved whatever fate pursued him. But Chioma raised a hand to silence them. No one escapes wrongdoing, she said. But neither should we deny someone the chance to repent. It is not our place to finish a story that destiny has only begun to rewrite. Ikem studied her with calm, steady eyes. The weight of her words settled over him like a solemn cloak. Do you want me to come with you? He asked quietly. Chioma nodded. He asked for you. Not as a healer he can exploit, but as a boy he wronged, as the owner of what he stole, as the one destiny chose. Ikem picked up the flute and held it close to his chest. The villagers watched as he stepped beside Chioma. An old woman called out, Be careful, child. Some wounds do not heal by kindness alone. Ikem bowed respectfully. Mama, he said, music does not choose whom it heals. My father always said, the flute belongs to whoever's heart is ready for change. With that, he followed Chioma toward the taxi. And the journey back to the city began quiet, tense, filled with the weight of two destinies converging again. The city awaited them with its noise, its chaos, and the shadow of Damien's suffering stretching long across its skyline. The mansion felt colder when they returned, as though the walls held their breath. Damien was on the floor again, but this time he wasn't screaming. He looked small, fragile, like a paper figure softened by rain. When he saw Ikem, his breath hitched. He attempted to kneel, but his legs wobbled beneath him. Ikem, he whispered. Ikem didn't say a word. He simply stepped closer. Damien lowered his face until it almost touched the marble. I sinned against you, he choked out. Against your father's legacy. Against the gift that wasn't mine to touch. Tears dripped from his chin. If you turn around and leave me here, you would be right. If you refuse to play for me, you would be justified. But if you can find mercy, please save me. The room was silent, thick with the sound of his raw pleading. Chioma pressed a hand to her mouth, trembling. Slowly, Ikem knelt beside Damien. I am not the one who chooses who deserves mercy, he whispered. The flute decides. He lifted the instrument. Damien's breathing stuttered. Chioma stepped back. A hush settled over the room like sacred air. And then, Ikem played. Not a long melody. Not a song of triumph or power. Just a soft, single tune. Gentle as dawn, warm as forgiveness. The sound drifted through the mansion, swirling like healing smoke, touching every corner, washing away the darkness lingering there. As the notes wrapped around Damien, his body convulsed. But differently this time. Not from suffering, but release. His breaths came in ragged gasps as the pain peeled away from him like layers of old skin. His veins eased. His muscles stopped shaking. Color slowly returned to his face. His eyes, tired, swollen, ashamed, lifted to Ikem with disbelief. And when the final note faded, Damien fell on his feet sobbing. Thank you, he whispered over and over, like a man reborn. Ikem lowered the flute, its glow fading gently into stillness. Chioma wrapped her arms around her husband, her own tears falling freely. They stayed like that for a long while, 3 lives intertwined by destiny, pain, greed, purity, and divine music. Later that evening, the news spread quickly. The city buzzed with shock as Damien, once feared, once proud, publicly confessed everything he had done. He returned every stolen coin. He apologized to the families he had deceived. He announced he would step down from every position he held and dedicate his life to service, charity, and restitution. And he meant it. People saw the sincerity, the shame, the transformation. In time, Chioma opened a healing foundation, one that provided care for the sick without charge, inspired by Ikem's gift. And Ikem, his journey had only begun. Chioma sponsored his education, and soon the world discovered the boy whose music restored bodies and hearts. He grew into a renowned musician, performing across nations, yet he never forgot Owo-Asaa, nor the Iroko tree, nor the legacy of his father's flute. And Damien, humbled, quiet, and forever changed, followed Chioma's footsteps closely, serving rather than commanding, giving rather than taking. Years later, when people told the story, they spoke of 3 lives forever bound by a sacred melody, one that punished greed, exposed lies, healed the pure, and reminded the world that even in the darkest heart, a spark of redemption can survive. And beneath the ancient Iroko tree of Owo-Asaa, where it all began, the wind still carries the sound of a flute, soft, gentle, eternal, whispering. Greed destroys, but purity blesses. A special shout out to Tales by Prosper from USA, Oku Christopher from Nigeria, Desmond from USA. May grace follow you and your dreams rise like the morning sun. And if you watch and comment, true love will locate you. Thank you for watching and sharing in this journey. Your love and support keep these stories alive. May your own path be filled with favor, peace, and the kind of love that never gives up. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I just might give you a shout out in the next story.